So, there's some huge news breaking in the world of global commerce. A deal that's been in the works for 20 years has just been finalized between India and the European Union, and people are calling it an absolute game changer. So, what is it exactly? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down what this historic agreement means for you, for these two economic giants, and honestly, for the rest of the world. And look, that's not just hype. When you have world leaders using a phrase like the mother of all deals, you know we're talking about something massive. It's a quote that just perfectly sums up the incredible ambition and the sheer scale of what we're about to dive into. So that really brings us to the two big questions, right? First, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the agreement itself, and then we'll zoom out and try to understand its absolutely massive global impact. Okay, so at its heart, what we're talking about here is a free trade agreement, or an FTA. It was finally signed on January 27th, 2026. But, and this is a big but, as the subtitle says, this was not an overnight thing. This agreement is the result of a 20-year marathon of talks and negotiations. All right, before we get any deeper, let's just quickly get on the same page about what an FTA actually is. You can think of it as a deal that just makes trade cheaper and a whole lot easier. It's all about removing the financial roadblocks, things like taxes and tariffs that goods hit when they cross from one country to another. The whole point is to get a smoother, more open flow of business. And this is where you really start to see just how huge this deal is. I mean, we're not just talking about a few specific items here and there. This agreement covers pretty much everything. A wild 99% of Indian exports to the EU and 97% of EU exports to India are now part of this. The bottom line? This is about as close as you can get to total free trade between two massive economic partners. Okay, so to really get why everyone's calling this the mother of all deals, we've got to look at the numbers. And trust me, they are staggering. They really do tell a story all on their own. First up, 20, as in 20 years. That is how long it took to get this thing signed. To put that into perspective, talks kicked off way back in the early 2000s. They fell apart multiple times over really tricky issues, everything from farm subsidies to intellectual property. So this wasn't just about money, it was a marathon of diplomacy, which makes the final agreement a pretty monumental achievement all by itself. All right, next number, 2 billion, with a B. That's roughly how many consumers are in the combined India and EU market. What this deal does is create basically one of the biggest single markets on the entire planet. We're talking about nearly a quarter of the global GDP. The potential for businesses to reach this massive new customer base is, well, it's just enormous. And our last big number for now, $136 billion. That's what trade between India and the EU was worth in 2025, the year before the deal kicked in. That's already a huge number, right? But now, with all these tariffs getting slashed, economists are saying that number could literally double within just the next decade. So we've talked about the massive scale, right? But the real question is, who actually wins here? Who benefits? Let's break down which industries in both India and the EU are really going to see the biggest boost from all this. This chart does a great job of laying it all out. You can see it's a win-win. For India, industries like textiles, gems, and agriculture are getting much easier access to wealthy European customers. And for the EU, well, that means stuff like luxury cars, wine, and high-tech machinery are going to get a whole lot cheaper and easier to sell in India. To give you an idea, tariffs on some cars were over 100%, and those are expected to drop in a big way. And you can bet the leaders on both sides understood just how huge this was. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi called it a historic milestone, not just for the economy, but as a brand new chapter in the India-EU relationship that would create jobs and all sorts of new opportunities. And you heard that exact same feeling from the European side too. The EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, her reaction was just pure excitement. We did it. And you'll notice she wasn't just talking about trade. She framed this as a win for the whole world, highlighting India's growing importance on the global stage. All right, let's zoom out one last time and look at the big picture. What does all of this mean for the rest of us? Because a deal this big doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It sends ripples across the entire globe about where world trade is heading. See, this is about so much more than just buying and selling stuff. For India and the EU, this means they're getting strategically closer, working together on tech, building more reliable supply chains. And for the world, it's a huge signal that the old ways of doing things are changing. We're seeing major world powers deliberately building strong new alliances, really redrawing the map of global trade. So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. Yeah, the economic benefits are huge, but this deal is about something bigger. It's really a strategic partnership that's built on shared goals, on growth, and on a shared vision for the future. And all of this leaves us with one really big question to think about. As countries all over the world look to build stronger, more diverse economic ties, is this massive deal between India and the EU, the new playbook for how global trade is going to work in the 21st century? I guess only time will tell.